This is how you create a REST API using Google Sheet. So now I'm on AppScript. I have all this starting code over here. If you do not have this starting code, don't worry about it. You can actually retrieve it from my previous video. So this is my previous video. In this video, I've actually included the step-by-step process on how you can actually come up with these codes that you're looking at right now. But of course, if you want to skip through all that entirely, in my previous video, I actually included a link where you can download the source code immediately. All right. So without further ado, let us get back to creating an API endpoint using Google Sheet. So first of all, I need to add a file, a script file, and let me just call it API. In this API file, I'll need to define a function called doPost, and doPost takes in a parameter called e. Now, the first thing that we need to do is to just check that the request is actually a post request. E post data, and if e post data exists, we're going to check that they are sending it as JSON. Once it passes this test, we'll need to extract the request data, use JSON parse, and extract the post data. Extract the contents within the post data. Now that we have the request data, we're going to check if the payload contains a function name and payload data. So let's do the check over here. Request data has own property called function, and request data has own property called payload. Now we're going to extract the function name that is being specified in the payload, request data function, and we're going to extract the payload as well. Next, we'll need to call the specified function with the payload data, and to do that, we'll need to call this executeFunction that takes in a function name and the payload. So this executeFunction, we have not defined it yet, so let's define it right at the bottom. For this executeFunction, which takes in a function name and a payload, within this function, we'll just implement the logic to execute different functions based on the function name. Now, what does this function look like? So if function name is equals to get to do, we will run this get to do function that takes in an ID. And for the payload, we expect the payload for this get to do function to contain an ID, so it will look like this, and we just return the result accordingly. Oh sorry, before we return the result, let's transform it into a proper object. Now for our result, we're going to return an ID. We are going to return the content of the to do, when is it created at, and when is it updated at. So if we go back and take a look at our Google Sheet, you notice that there are 4 fields: the ID, content, created at, and updated at. So let's copy this and let's just paste it over here so that we can refer it. To get the ID, I need to access the, sorry, for these results, I'm just going to change it to do data. From the to do data, access the first index to get the ID. To get the content, we're going to access the second index, and so on. Alright, so now we have structured the object to contain all these 4 properties: ID, content, created at, and updated at. So now our execute function is working properly, should be working properly. The next thing that we need to do is to return the result as a JSON. So how do you return it? We need to use this function called content service and create a text output. Within the text output, we need to include a JSON stringify result, and make sure to set the MIME type as JSON, like this. Next, we'll need to deploy the app itself. So to deploy the app, we need to click on the deploy button over here and select new deployment. You should see a web app over here. If you don't, click on this gear icon and select web app. Once you select web app, so just select web app. For the description, you can type in anything. For me, I'll just call this the first deployment. Who has access? Make sure you change it to anyone. Once you're done, click deploy. Once you deploy the app, you should have a unique URL. Copy this URL and go over to Postman and paste it here. Now, for the body, make sure that you change it to JSON. As for the content itself, let's take a look at our app script. We have implemented a get-to-do, and get-to-do is expecting something. It's expecting a payload of ID, right? So we need to have an ID over here. So we're going to give it a valid ID. So to get a valid ID, we will need to go over to our Google Sheet, copy an existing valid ID, go over to Postman again, and paste the valid ID over here. Now, once I send this, I should be able to get the to-do data. Oops, something's not working. The script has completed but did not return anything. Okay, let us double check our script. Oh, right. The structure is wrong, so let us just... Our object should have a function, and then there will be another property called payload, and this payload will include the ID of the to-do that we are trying to retrieve. And for the function, we need to include the function name that we are trying to execute. So it's going to be get to do. Once we have this, we click send. It should work now. So with that, we've successfully implemented the get to do function. Now, if you were to go back to AppScript, you notice that we can just repeat the same pattern for the other function that we like to implement. For example, we can create a function to account create to do, and of course you gotta put implementation here and so on. So with this pattern, you can create as many API endpoint as you want. So I hope this gives you a clear understanding of how you can set up a backend API using Google Sheet. If you find this video helpful, give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.